Thank you all for coming. I hope you had a good trip over and that the parking wasn't too bad. Tonight we have the privilege, once again, to hear from Dr. Norman Blumenthal. Dr. Blumenthal is an expert in the area of trauma, loss, and bereavement. He occupies the Zachter Family Chair in Trauma and Crisis Counseling at Ohel. He is the director of the Ohel Miriam Center for Trauma, Bereavement, and Crisis Response, and he is the director of the group psychotherapy training for psychiatry residents and psychology interns at North Shore Long Island Jewish Hospital. Not to mention the educational director of the counseling training program for smicha students at Yeshiva University. On the side, he makes himself very available. I can tell you that Yeshiva Har Torah has been beneficiaries, regrettably, unfortunately, during difficult times, but I can tell you that Dr. Blumenthal has been an incredible source of support and strength when Yeshiva Har Torah has gone through some difficult times, losing students, difficult times. And Dr. Blumenthal makes himself incredibly available to parents, faculty, students, professionals. We consult with him from time to time, Dr. Feinberg in particular, and I want to thank her for her efforts to arrange tonight's evening. And without further ado, really a tremendous privilege and pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Norman Blumenthal.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi. And again, with your permission, it's a privilege. I mean, sometimes, I very rarely have the opportunity to say that it's a pleasure to be here, because usually when I come, it's not for good reasons. But the Rabbi mentioned that part of my job is to help people with crisis and difficult situations, but some institutions make that a lot easier than others. And certainly over the years, when we've had to, Har Torah has really been one of the places that make it very easy for me to do my job. And Dr. Feinberg and I know each other for a few years, but it's really a very reciprocally rewarding relationship. I do also have to acknowledge Ohel for giving me the opportunity to do this and to do this at no charge through my function as the director of the Ohel trauma team, and thank David Mendel, our CEO, and the Presidium, Mel Zachter and Jay Kestenbaum, as well as the tech department who are putting these together. And again, those of us with a lot of gray in our beard are particularly appreciative of the tech department and what they do. What I will probably speak for about, let's say 20, maybe 30 minutes. I'll try to keep around until around 20 minutes, or maybe 30. And then hopefully we have some time for a little give and take, some discussion, questions asked. It is a large group, we're up to 65. So it doesn't lend itself to that kind of more free-flowing give and take that you can have when you have a smaller crowd. And so I'm going to keep everybody muted. I am the host, and this is my one opportunity to exercise a lot of power. So I'm going to keep everybody muted. If you have a question, or if you have some input, or want to comment on something that's being said, there is a chat option on the bottom of your screen. And please use that to submit questions, thoughts, etc. And then we'll stop maybe at various points, either in the middle or towards the end, depending how many come through, and try to address those issues or share the information and suggestions that people themselves may have. You can send the chat one of two ways. You can send it out to everyone if you want. If you're asking a question and you don't want people to know that it's coming from you, then you can send it privately to me as the host, and I won't divulge who the question comes from. If we are recording this, so the presentation will be, if somebody was not able to make it, it will be available in a day or two on the Ohel website or on YouTube. And you can tell people about it, or avail yourself of that. If the questions appear to be the divulging of who's asking or something like that, if it does get at that personal level, then we usually edit out those questions or edit out all the questions in order to preserve people's confidentiality. But again, please feel free, and if, in fact, if it's so personal, that you're concerned, please mention that you don't want this on the recording, and we certainly will respect your wishes. That being said, what actually Karen did Karen Feinberg did, which was so important and so useful, was to canvass the school parents and say what's on your mind. So to make sure, because very often if I'm invited to speak somewhere from a scholar in residence, something and the people say to me, what do you think you should speak about? I say, well, what does your community need to hear? It's not what might be of interest or importance in one community may not be to the other. So I think it was very helpful to get the feedback, and she culled from it the leitmotifs, the themes that are important. And I broke them down to 4. I put some questions together, and I have them on the share screen, so you should be able to see them. So we're going to address 4 issues. One of them, let's go through them all, and then we'll talk. One of them is juggling work, homeschooling, getting kids to cooperate. The other one is what skills should we be developing? Well, then about missed milestones, which I just gave a webinar about. And then what's the long-term impact? So I'll try to address these, but again, please participate and please contribute. As is my wont, I threw in 1 or 2 cartoons just to give this a little bit more of a lighter touch. So there you have the run for people with short attention span, and as you can see, it's a very short run. Let's address the question of how do you juggle work and homeschooling, and how do you get kids to cooperate, etc. We're all working from home. The kids we're trying to maintain education and schooling remotely, which has, as you might by now well know, has its fair share of shortcomings. And how do we handle all that? So first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the homeschooling. And I'm going to give you a perspective. I hope that I won't get in trouble with the administration. And if I get sent to the principal's office, I guess that's going to be an interesting experience. But because I have a perspective that maybe people in the school setting don't share, but I'll share it with you. And I want to just address what's the goal. What comes down to what is the goal of this remote education, and what's the goal of remote schooling? And in general, teachers' roles are changing with technology, all the more so in these situations. So what I'm proposing is, and this comes up a lot in many situations, we're in a crisis right now. This is we're not like in a regular normal situation, but just, relying on technology to connect to one another. We're in a bona fide crisis. And when you're in a crisis situation, it changes a lot of the perspectives. For example, many of the calls that we're getting at Ohel are people who have various situations that under normal circumstances, we might refer to a therapist or might want to have them fixed. They might be some anxiety, there might be some depression. I'm not talking about anything like really, a crisis proportion, but there are situations that that could easily be addressed under more optimal situation. Could be interpersonal matters, some minor or moderate marital issues that now being confined together and under this detention may have become exacerbated. And if they are problems that we can band-aid or manage and address them when things get back to normal, that's pretty much where we're going with this, because in a crisis situation, we don't necessarily have the luxury to deal with certain problems because we're just trying to get through the day. We're trying to survive, basically. A metaphor I give sometimes, imagine you're living in the Midwest and you're about to be hit with some huge tornado. And of course, you board up your windows and you tie down all your movable objects. And while you're hunkered down in the safest part of your house, your husband or wife says, we have that leaky faucet in the basement. What are we going to take care of that? Well, now's not the time to deal with that leaky faucet. And I think the same thing is true when we think about remote schooling. I think the goal of remote schooling is to maintain the connection, to maintain the momentum, to let the child still feel connected to their school, let the child feel connected to their Mora, connected to their Rebbe. The particular information that they accrue, I think, is going to take a back seat to that. If they can, and if they can learn, if they can be further educated and grow in terms of their knowledge and skills, hine matov manoim. But if it's going to become at the expense of the child's equanimity or the equanimity in the home, I'd rather put the particular education aside and make sure that there is a peaceful home. So I would tell parents that if the remote schooling is causing conflict or is causing tension, and again, some children are much more ideally suited to the homeschooling than others. Obviously, your children with varying degrees of what we call dysregulatory disorders, whether it's ADHD, and again, ADHD is probably what's afflicting most of you now while I'm speaking. It's an inability to focus or pay attention. But whether it's ADHD, conduct disorders, they're going to have a much harder time. I mean, it's much harder for a child with ADHD to be confined to their home, to sit in front of a screen. I mean, if it's a video game, there's no problem, but for education from a teacher. And other kids are just more naturally, adept at it or able to benefit from it. So, if it's going to create tension in the home, I would sooner tell you just, let them skip some days. Let them just do part of the time. Now, very important is that you coordinate this with the teacher. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise. You may need to contact the school or contact the teacher, contact the mental health professionals and say, my kid just can't handle it. My kid's driving him crazy, and work it out with them how you can manage this. But number one is maintaining the connection with the school. Education doesn't stop because of a crisis. This is where we expect you to be back hopefully soon. And at the same time, also preserving the equanimity in the home. I was running a group. One of the groups we've been running. We're running a number of groups at Ohel. In fact, I'm currently running 4 groups a week for bereavement. Three. I'm running 3. There's 5 groups being run right now. 4 for people who lost parents, 1 who lost siblings, and we're starting a widows group next week. In 2 weeks. But one of the groups we ran for a while was a group for parents with children with disabilities, and who are now suddenly home, not in their programs. And one mother was telling me about how she's fighting with her kid because she wants him off the devices and he wants to stay on devices, and it's creating friction in the home. And I basically said to her, listen, obviously you have to contain it to some extent, but you maybe have to give in more for the shalom bayis, for the peace at home, because we're all confined to the home. You can't have fighting. In fact, I went so far as to promise her that when all this is over, I'll help her get her kid off the devices if my wife can get me off my devices. But it's an emergency time, and the peace and tranquility of the home may have to take over some of the other standards, and we all have our standards. And without even going into what's the right ones or not, but we may be bending a lot more under this crisis situation, because as I said, we're in a crisis and we want to get through it without any kind of residual damage and without harm to the relationships in the home. By the way, interestingly enough, and by the way, it's not to say there aren't situations where you have to draw the line. Kids are kids. Or a kid may think, hey, if I feign like I can't take it anymore, I'm not going to, your children. And if your child is just, trying to be manipulative, of course you put your foot down. But if it's real and it's hard, we're gonna extend the corral. We're gonna be more lenient about it, and we're gonna focus more on the connection to school rather than particular information that they accrue. By the way, as I said, there's some children who are actually benefiting from this. Many of the kids for whom the school day is difficult, whether it's because of the difficulty focusing and paying attention, learning disabilities, not the serious ones, obviously they're in special programs, but mild learning disabilities that may become, that might make learning harder. Being home is very nice. The children with social difficulties, we're finding that some of the children who have trouble getting along, who are struggling with the social interactions, are finding it very nice to be home. So we have that as well. And the other thing that I think is happening is we're getting very good and imaginative in this use of technology, which is, and I guess I'm wondering. I mean, there was a question later about what's going to happen in the future, and it's always hard to predict these things. But I wouldn't be surprised if technology and remote learning will be much more part of our mainstream life, even when we can go back to school, because we're being forced into it right now. I often think that the internet is the refuah before the makkah, because can you imagine if we had this type of quarantining and social distancing without this technology, what life would be like. So we may, I think, and again, teachers and others are using very imaginative ways to engage the children, and it may become much more. I mean, and I'm sure I'm speaking for HaTorah as well. Many of the schools, especially the more modern schools today, do have computers in the classroom, and children are shifting back and forth between the computer and the teacher. And we may be doing more of that. As I often say, the role of the teacher is changing with technology, because we don't need teachers as providers of information. Any child can click a mouse and find out anything the teacher has to offer them in terms of information, and even more. The teacher's role today is to put the information in a meaningful context, to teach the child how to effectively use this medium of acquiring information, and they're also becoming much more deputy mental health professionals and addressing some of the more emotional issues, psychological issues that children are having. I think that addressed that. Let me just look. There is one chat question. Maybe it's a question related to this, so we can, hold on. Let me chat one. Here we go. Okay. This is a private question. My real fear, how do you undo the damage? Kids will get used to this, and how do we get them back to our original expectations and standards? Wonderful question. I think I was going to sort of address it later, but I'll address it now. It's a wonderful question, because if anybody thinks we're going to emerge from this when this is over, when they discover the vaccine or the cure, or somehow another, create a situation where we can resume our communal life, that we're just going to wipe our brow and just go right back to where we were, is terribly mistaken. First of all, the research on quarantine demonstrates pretty effectively that it takes a long time to readapt to social life. And we're probably going to very gingerly go back to the world we had. And yes, it's going to require an adjustment. And I think the schools recognize, and if they don't, they should, that when that time comes, when children are returning to school, there's going to have to be a reacclimation. We're going to have to sort of help them readjust. First of all, there has to be an acknowledgement. It's very interesting. There was a study done a number of years ago. It resonates very much with our history as Jews, but it seems in Nepal, the government came at one point, was in the middle of some war, and just marched into every town, took every kid from 15 to 25 and put them into the army for a 30-year conscription, much like what the Tsar did to us in Russia. We have many stories of that in our history. And they spend years in the army, some of them kids, and witnessing terrible atrocities, etc. And when they came back after this whole whatever was going on was over, this anthropologist studied their return, and he found that there were some towns that just sort of like said, "All right, hi," and let them move into their homes and didn't make much of it. And other towns had events celebrating and commemorating their return. And pretty consistently, the towns where they acknowledged and celebrated and formalized, if you will, their return to their regular life, the people who are returning, these young people who returned, fared much better than those who didn't. It's shades of what happened after post-Vietnam, for those who remember, where in contrast to other wars, there was really no acknowledgement of the soldiers coming back. And so the same thing is going to be true for us as we return to our work settings and as we return to school, that we're going to need to have some formal acknowledgement and recognition of that, and have to readjust. And the reacclimation will probably be different than it's before. So we're aware of it, and it's something that will have to be done, and the children have to be prepared and done in a consistent and in planned fashion. Let's see another chat. Give me a second. Okay, how can I motivate the kids to participate in some non-academic activities? I think my answer, I hope I'm addressing this correctly, is pick your battles. Not everybody takes to it the same way. Many kids have different ways. And first, what's important, one of the things I hope children are going to learn from this is how to self-entertain. That they don't need, when I do my presentations, one of them has, and I have this thing with cartoons. And one of them shows this couple with two children on a speedboat. The speedboat is practically vertical, racing through the water. And the husband says to the wife, "Did you bring any videos to entertain the children?" Our children are so used to having entertainment provided for them, how themselves to pick what's useful for them. But if you're looking in terms, let's say, just to keep them busy, and again, that speaks to the other part of the question is, how do we keep our workday going when we have to entertain children and educate them? Know your child. and see what grabs them and see what interests them, because what will be of interest to one may not be interest to another. Some may take to the art programs, and some may take more to the adventure shows or tourists. A lot of programs that take people on tours. Some may take more to the music. So you have to know your child. And again, there's so many computers in the house, and you might have to take turns. But don't be too busy trying to entertain them. Help them identify what interests them, and try to teach them how to occupy themselves to keep themselves busy. Okay, I just saw another question came up, so let me grab that, and then maybe we'll go on. What are your thoughts on screen time all day? Does it depend on age? Apologies, this has been covered. I was a few minutes late. Hope you weren't late because you were on your screen. No, not good to be on the screen all day. It creates a sort of like lethargy. Most screen activities are more passive in nature. And it does also distorts your sense of time. And by the way, you have to be very selective about what you allow, because even though children may be, while they're watching or playing video games, may seem calm, if the shows they're watching and if the video games they're playing are these fast action, violent types, there's a buildup, and afterwards they can be very agitated. So you have to be selective. You have to be aware of what they're on. But no, and a whole day. By the way, the other problem with the whole day on the screens is that you're not physically active. And one of the challenges of this time is to make sure that there's also physical activity, again, within the confines of what keeps everybody safe, whether it's walking, bike riding, calisthenics of some sort, exercises of some sort, or again, if there's room or if there's a backyard for actual ball playing, etc. But you don't want, one of the very amusing cartoons that have been making the rounds shows this hugely obese couple, much wider than their front door, and they're holding a newspaper that says quarantine is over, and they say, how are we going to get out? We don't want to be like that. We want to make sure that everybody's physically well also, and that's going to require some more physical activity. If the child will not get off, you can get programs that shut the computer on and off, or disconnect the internet at particular times when it's just not possible, so you can have an external imposition that will make sure that they're not overused. Okay, let's talk about what skills should we be developing. Okay, so I think there are a lot, and I think it depends, and I'm not sure I'll cover every one of them, and people may have some comments, but I'll share with you what comes out from me, what I think about. First of all, is frustration tolerance. Things don't always work out the way we want to, and there's a lot of frustration we're all experiencing. This wasn't how we anticipated Pesach would be. This isn't how we anticipated our spring, and for those are graduating, graduation. As we were talking briefly before, it's looking very pessimistic or slim that there will be summer camp or a full summer of summer camp, and that's a huge disappointment. And we're used to, we live in a time that we're used to getting everything we want. We most of our children being raised of almost unprecedented opulence, with technology that will just do anything and everything you want it to do. And our capacity to tolerate frustration and not getting what we want is low. And it's not like we want to purposely engineer that. But that's the reality, and maybe a good lesson. We don't know what the future holds, and there may be other periods where there has to be sacrifice and forfeiture of things we want, and this may be a very good opportunity for the children to develop, and we have to let them develop. We can't give them speeches, but we may have to let them be frustrated and let them be upset, and find a way to incorporate that into their inner landscape, so they know that this is part of life, even on these remarkable times when we have unprecedented wealth and when we have machines and ways to service people that we've never had before. One of the incredible things about all this is that, again, we think we're so omnipotent, and then a little virus basically shut the world to us. One of my friends put it, Hashem pulled the plug on the world. And that can still happen. Another very important point, which I think we all can learn from, and certainly children can learn from, skills can develop, is gratitude and appreciation. As I'm sure Dr. Feinberg knows, there's a remarkable body of literature on gratitude, and that people who enumerate gratitude, keep gratitude journals, have less depression, less anxiety, are more productive at work, are healthier, they sleep better. There's even more dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine secreted in their central nervous system. So in other words, gratitude is a natural tranquilizer and antidepressant. And Baruch Hashem, we have 3 times a day when we say Modeh. And I will tell you personally, since I came across this literature, I always, when I say Modeh Mishmones, I always try to think about something in my life for which I'm grateful. And it's a very healthy thing. And now, when we're deprived of so much, we have to be grateful for the home we have. We have to be grateful for the family we have. We have to be grateful for technology that is allowing us to have as much connection as we can. So it's a wonderful opportunity to experience it. In times of deprivation, it's a wonderful opportunity and by the way, to appreciate what we're missing. That we're missing this communal life, we're missing school, and appreciate it all the more. It's, by the way, it's a great time to learn skills that we don't have time to learn, or develop skills that we don't have time to develop otherwise, especially with our yeshiva schedule. With that very long and arduous schedule, we don't necessarily, not all children have the opportunity to develop skills with musical instruments, in art and woodworking and imaginary play, or using their imagination in creative writing. And there's programs for everything. And maybe now is a very good time to identify those, if you will, luxuries or potential hobbies or skills. Not if your kid is so incredibly talented that they're going to, be in the New York Philharmonic, and I hope you've been nurturing that already beforehand. But for those, if you want your kid to be able to pick up a guitar and enjoy it, and let that be a source of an outlet for him, or even, again, there's a limit how much ball play you can do, but even in terms of exercise or skills, if it's a hoop in your driveway, now's a very nice time to let them develop those skills they may not have had time to develop. As I mentioned earlier, how do you have fun and recreation in your house? How do you self-entertain? You don't always, again, with the technology we have, we're used to everything comes. I'll tell a personal story. My wife and I did a vacation in the Canadian Rockies. Those of you who may have done that, the Canadian Rockies are just breathtaking. You don't have to go anywhere, just everywhere you turn. It's remarkable scenery. And one of the sites is the Columbia ice fields. And we rented a car and drove around there our own. Columbia ice fields, you have to go on a special bus to get to them. We went to the place, we got on this bus, and again, everywhere you look, you're just, marveling at how beautiful everything is. And after the lady who was the tour guide went through the basics of what the Columbia ice fields were, there was still about another 10, 15 minutes to get there. And she's just gabbing away and talking. And I want to shut up, let me just enjoy it. But we're so used to constantly having to be entertained that they have to feel like they have to constantly give us things. And you can just enjoy things yourself. You can appreciate a lot and entertain yourself on your own. This is a wonderful chance to do this. And I think one more thing, which is, I think we all can learn, and again, not very much part of our life until now, is patience. We have to wait. We don't know how long this thing is going to go. We don't know what the trajectory will be, and we have to patiently wait, taking necessary precautions till we get to we find out it's time to return. I'll just share again. I don't want to sermonize, but in my work in bereavement, one of the questions that comes up, we're all familiar with when Nadav and Aviah were killed. Aaron's sons were killed during one of the most celebratory moments for the Jews in the desert, and Moshe gives Aaron comfort, and then it says 2 very powerful words, Vayidam Aaron, and most translated it as Aaron was silent. But one of the commentators points out that there's a pasuk in Tehillim, and the pasuk is Dom Lashem v'hitcholel lo, that which translates, be patient and wait for Hashem. And that really means is that Aaron was patient. He waited. He's going to wait until somehow or another he'll be deserving to know why this tragedy had to happen to him. Being patient is very important. That's a very important part of our life, and not something we're used to. We're used to everything coming to us quickly. And we have to sit and wait because we really have no idea how long it's going to take. By the way, one other skill, and I'm going to take the questions, that I think is important, is also how to get our information in our news, because we live in a very different world in terms of how information is imparted. There's again, since we're relying so much on social media and the internet, so there's huge competition to get our attention. So sometimes information hasn't been verified yet as being promulgated as the God-given truth. And Some of it is slanted or outright distorted, and we have to learn, and that we can teach our children. How do you get information using reliable sources? How do you process the bombardment of information that we're getting on our computers, and how to limit it and filter it? And that's, again, a skill that we can develop. Let me see what the 5 chats. Wow. So we may have to, all right. Let me, okay. All right, I think that deliveries not coming a day later has been a refreshing message for my children. They're taking food and other stuff so quickly for granted. Right, exactly it, right. And go order something, go order a face mask from Amazon if you want to talk about having to have patience. Or for that matter, hand sanitizer and toilet paper. Right, it's, things are not just coming quickly to us, and you might not get the brand of cottage cheese that you used to get. And this is, I know that's a crisis. I'm sorry to mention that when I'm not there to do the crisis inoculation. But yeah, very good point. All right, have a young child who is struggling with remote school, fighting to get any work done at all. What can I do? A part of me just wants to stop with all the online learning. Okay, I'm sure you're the only one in the United States of America who wants to stop the online learning and finding it very frustrating. So I don't know if I should really answer that question, because you probably only, I hope you're reading through my sarcasm. Again, if it's an extreme situation, call Dr. Feinberg. There may be a situation, it may be, or for that matter, again, if you're more comfortable, the Ohel crisis team, I and my colleagues are available, full confidentiality, no charge for people who are having crises during this COVID-19. You can get our number either through Dr. Feinberg or on the Ohel website. But if it's not of that extreme nature, I don't think it's a very good message to say to the kid, you don't have to, unless it's processed with a professional, I wouldn't rush and say you don't have to go online at all. But I think you can, maybe what might work better if the child's having a hard time with it is doing it in spurts, in brief increments. Speak to the teacher whether the lesson could be recorded, and can the child do it. Some children just do better with 10-minute spurts of learning than the entire time. You can be sympathetic. You can just say, it is hard. I know it's hard. It's a very big part of what we're doing now, is instead of getting angry and recommending, you can commiserate with them. And you'll be surprised that sometimes just saying to the child, I know how hard it is. I know how difficult it is. I'm sympathetic, will prompt them to be more willing to try. But without consulting with your own mental health team or with someone else, I wouldn't right away let them get off completely, although there might be circumstances where that's warranted, but I wouldn't make that decision on my own. Okay, another one in particular, very low tolerance for when I say no or when things don't go their way. You know me? I didn't know that was, okay. Yeah, some children have a very hard time with a no, and especially today because they don't hear many no's. Very few of us hear no's. In fact, this coronavirus is one big no. So that is hard. One of the things you can do, and again, please, for the extreme circumstances, I don't think we can address them in a universal kind of way, but sometimes it's good to say to some of those children who just have a very hard time with that frustration, is to give them a heads up and give them a chance to brace themselves. I'm about to tell you something you don't want to hear. Let's see how well you can handle it, and compliment them for handling it well. But make it an issue and make it something that you can address. But again, if it's extreme, please consult with the professionals. How can I help my teenager to be more active? How do I know he is happy, if he is in a normal for today's situation? So I think that's a good question. We're all more anxious. We're all more depressed. We're in a stressful situation. And the rates of, CVS is reporting, I think, a 30% increase in prescriptions for anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication. One of my favorite psychiatrists, who happen to have the name Dr. Feinberg, told me that he wants to have a dispenser for Klonopin. It's like we're all in difficult states. So it's a good question to ask, and teenagers can be more secretive, especially with parents. So I think the best way whenever you have a situation with a child where you think they may be harboring some challenges and are not forthright with it, is instead, don't interrogate. Then you're for sure never going to find out. But try to create a context which allows for opening up and sharing. So it might be a walk. It might be just sort of sitting together. It might be sharing your struggles. And it creates a context where there's an opportunity for sharing. By the way, also don't minimize your own intuitive sense. I'm the professional, but if I'm dealing with a parent and the parent says, my guts tell me this and this is going on, I never discount that, because a parent, particularly a mother, has that sixth sense and they know when something is cooking. And so trust your intuitive sense if you think something is ill-conceived, is wrong. The teenager would be more active. If I had to venture a guess, again, to a universal sense, if a teenager is becoming inactive, either themselves are struggling with some depression, and depression rates in teens are pretty high. If we go by just one incident, I think it can be as high as 30% according to some studies. So it could be that this is prompting a depression. But the other thing that you always have to think about, whether it's COVID-19 or not COVID-19, with a teenager who is showing that kind of lethargy, is that there is maybe some social rejection, peer rejection, which is very much at the core of what might be going on, and you have to maybe poke around in that direction. Okay. I think I covered those. Okay, let's go on to the next item, which is one that I just gave a webinar about, which is the missed milestones. If you can't see the cartoon, it's the helicopter parent support group, and the leader says everyone could just take a seat. Okay, so missed milestones is, first of all, and I think this is probably the most important message, especially when we're talking about children and talking about their Washington trip, their graduation, things like that. We have a tendency sometimes to minimize it and downplay it, even sleepaway camp or day camp. Big deal when you're my age, whether you went to Washington after 8th grade or didn't go is not going to make a big difference. And maybe that's true, but they're not your age. And for the child who has been looking forward to this, who's been Xing off the days for sleepaway camp, for the Washington trip, for graduation, it's big. And more important than trying to make it appear not so big is, again, like I said earlier, commiserate. I validate and commiserate. It stinks. It's really unfortunate. My grandson was supposed to have his bar mitzvah on Shabbos HaGadol. Needless to say, he didn't. They had a Tuesday night celebration on Zoom. And when it came to reading the Torah, he read the Torah. He didn't read the whole thing, but he read part of what he had prepared. And my daughter Zoomed all the guests. Zoom muted all the guests. So when he lame, afterwards, the rabbi was speaking. He said he's never heard the shul so quiet during Kriyas Torah. He wants to know if he can get that Zoom button for the shul when everybody comes back. But it's you spend a year working on your parsha and on your speech, and you already bought your suit, and the candy was already bought and packaged and sitting in grandma and grandpa's basement. To have a Zoom bar mitzvah, it stinks. It's really not great, and it is unfortunate. Now, important as well is we try sometimes to replicate the celebration, the bar mitzvah, the wedding, etc., the graduation on Zoom, and I think we're getting good at it. I think we're getting better. But I gave a metaphor before, and I think it resonated with a lot of people, so I'll give it again. It's very interesting. I once read a book about the Wright brothers, and the question was, how come the Wright brothers managed to invent a machine that flies, and people had been for hundreds of years trying to invent a device that flies, and they couldn't? And there was a very key difference between what the Wright brothers did and everybody else did. Everybody else tried to create a machine that acted like a bird. The Wright brothers created a machine that flies like a machine. A similar thing happened with the computer chess programs. For years, they were trying to develop a computer program that could beat everybody, and yet they couldn't. The masters could still beat the computer. And they realized that they're trying to get the computer to play like a person. When they programmed the computer to play like a computer, known as Deep Blue, the computer was unbeatable. So the same thing is, if we're making a Zoom celebration, if you're having a Zoom graduation, do it like Zoom. Don't try to replicate the in-person experience on Zoom. That doesn't work. What really works was if you do it like that. Just to give you an idea, we were invited this past Sunday to a Zoom Vort. What the couple did, which I thought was very, again, adapted to Zoom. Okay, everybody make sure their phones and computers are muted. The background noise can be disturbing. What they did, what I thought was so clever, is everybody got a 5-minute appointment. And we each had our 5 minutes with the chassan and kala to say mazel tov and get to meet whichever one we didn't know. And again, and if it was in a hall or something, everybody would take turns, walk over, stand in line, and get to meet the person. Very hard to do that when it's a Zoom thing with 70 people in their pictures. So this is a way of celebrating, but celebrating like a machine. But again, please don't minimize it. It's big. Okay. Next thing. Okay, let's go down a little bit. That was missed milestones. Oh, we're down to the last one. Oh, I skipped one. How do you like that? I have in my notes one. I did it on this shared screen. There's one about the transition back to school and then the long-term impacts. Let's talk about those. So as I mentioned before, the return to school has to be acknowledged. It can't be just walk into class and pick up from where you left off. There has to be some events, some gatherings that give it a name and give it and allow the child to shift gears. Because you see, we have a remarkable capacity to what we call acclimate. In other words, even in difficult situations, I often give as an example for acclimation is I happen to live in the 5 towns. I don't hear the airplanes, but we acclimate to it. In fact, Rabbi Billet often says that when Mashiach comes, we'll be the first to go because we're right by JFK. But we're not, we don't hear it because we acclimate. We're acclimating to social distancing. We're acclimating to the tension. And when we come back, we may have to reacclimate to communal living. And we have to be careful about the fear. And in fact, this touches upon probably the next point, which I was going to make, which is it's a distinct possibility that children will be coming back to school without our having conquered this illness, before there's a vaccine or a more readily available cure for this illness. So they're going to be going back with some trepidation and some realistic trepidation. So first of all, the criteria of what we're doing and the rationale for what we're doing has to be crystal clear and consistently implemented. If children hear one thing from the school, another from a parent, and a third thing from Tante Yenta, their anxiety will be through the roof. We as a community have to have a clear, and so far we've been pretty good about that. And that we have some, I know certainly a lot of the communities, there are some communities where there's differences, but I think most of the communities that we're addressing here have really worked as a unit, and that does lend itself to more comfort. So I think it has to be well coordinated, clear criteria that are endorsed by the school and by the parents. Fear is very contagious. And if a parent is sending their child back to school with trepidation and fear, no matter, you may be a Hollywood actor or actress, you're not hiding it from your child. Your child will see it, feel it, and sense it. And don't think you're hiding it. So make sure you yourself, it's a little bit like putting the oxygen mask on yourself in the airplane before your child. Make sure you yourself have come to terms with the manner and fashion in which you're returning to school, and then that'll be more feasible for your child. And then okay, let me just look quickly if there's any other, no, okay. And then the long-term impact, what's it gonna be like? So whenever I get asked that question, and I get asked that question a lot, I'd like to quote the great philosopher and theologian, Yogi Berra, who often would say that prognosticating is very difficult, especially about the future. So I don't want to prognosticate, especially about the future. And I don't know, but I'm going to entertain with you 2 possibilities, not mutually exclusive, under what circumstance, I alluded to earlier, what circumstances we're going to be returning to the communal life again into the academic setting. One possibility, which would be certainly the most desirable one, but probably more long-term, is we get a handle on this disease. The vaccine comes out, or a quick cure, testing, whatever it might be. We conquer it as we have conquered many other diseases, and we can put this behind us. This can be a part of history. That may happen, probably not in the short term. My best guess is, from what I'm reading, and I hope I'm wrong actually, is that they were going to sooner reach the other scenario, which is that we just can't stay home any longer. It's not economically viable. It's not academically viable. And we may have to go back, maybe more knowledgeable, maybe having a better handle on the illness than we do now, but while the danger and the illness is still present. And we may be going back to our work settings and our academic settings with masks, with 6 feet distance between us. I know there's certainly some serious conversation now in the shuls of speeding up the davening, staggering minyanim, having seats designated 6 feet apart, people coming to shul with masks and gloves, and resuming that aspect of communal life, but with all those limitations. I have a feeling that's what we're going to be facing first before we get to that point where we can just take off the masks and have relaxed communal life again. And if that's the case, then the psychology that's going to work. And on the assumption that that's more of the short-term anticipation is like any other situation where you live with danger, and we're not used to that. We've lived very protective lives. Yes, there's been danger, but for the most part, we haven't lived in settings in war-torn areas. I will tell you something interesting from our work in Ohel. About, I think it's now 2 years ago, we were asked to come down to Houston following the floods. And one of the reasons why we were asked is that we had done a lot of the work after Hurricane Sandy. And so we had all our workbooks, we had our expertise and our experience. And then we realized something very interesting. Hurricane Sandy was an event that statistically will probably happen once in 100 years. It was a confluence of meteorological events that the likelihood of all those happening at the same time is very, very rare. So the main thrust of our interventions, particularly with children, was it's not going to happen again. You don't have to be scared of the rainfall. You don't have to be scared of even little floods, because that kind of flood's not going to happen again. But when we came to Houston, it became apparent to us that was their third flood in 16 months. And it's far from certain that they won't have floods again in the future, which required a different approach, because we couldn't just say so when the kids got panicky when it started to rain, we couldn't just say, well, it's not going to happen. Well, it happened 3 times in 16 months. So it was a different approach. And interestingly enough, and I think we might find this interesting, when we realized that, and we had to sort of search for a model of how do you cope with the presence of danger, the model actually was a city in Israel known as Sderot. Sderot is a lovely, quaint southern town in Israel, but every once in a while Hamas decides to shake things up and shoots rockets at them. And they're in danger. And they being a Jewish country, teams of psychologists came down and studied what the psychological impact was and what was helpful. And what's interesting is the approach, which we adapted then to the Houston floods, was not to say to the children, there's no danger, there is danger. The approach was, we're doing what we can to minimize the danger. We are actively working to ensure your safety. We can't guarantee it. And unfortunately, that is the case. One of the questions we've gotten asked at Ohel was, what do we say to classmates if a classmate's father died? Now, until this thing happened, and I've probably done that at the Har Torah, we come into the class and we say, Baruch Hashem, it's rare. Young parents don't die nowadays. We don't have orphanages like they used to have in pre-Holocaust Europe. We're surviving, we're living well. We're telling them we can't say that, because unfortunately the rate of death from the coronavirus is so prevalent. It's not huge, it's not the majority, but it's high enough that we cannot just say, hey, this is rare. So we're taking precautions. We're doing what we can. And I think that's what that has to be probably the message, as we are there's probably going to be an interim period where we resume our communal life and academic life while the danger of the disease is still present. And the message the focus and the message has to be on the precautionary measures we're taking, not on the guarantee of safety, which we don't have. I'll conclude. There was a famous line they attribute to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and I'll say it in the original Yiddish. He used to say, "A mensch darf tun, nicht auftein." Man has to do, not accomplish. And I think we're reclaiming that, because I think the thrust of our messages to our children in the near future will be that a mensch darf tun, nicht auftein. We're going to do the best that we can. And hopefully soon, God willing, we'll get a handle on it. We'll get the vaccine, we'll get the testing, we'll find the treatments, and we'll put all this behind us. I hope it was helpful. We have a few more minutes. Let me see if there's anybody. Please, if you have questions or comments, or you have suggestions that I didn't think of, I'm going to take off. I'm going to stop the sharing. I don't need that now. Okay. So now we have, okay. So I have a full view of everybody. Does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question or say something? Or does anybody want to comment on the chat? Oh, we have a chat. Okay. Okay. Social emotional impact. Okay. So what's the social emotional impact of what's going on? Okay, let me address that. So first of all, I think the easiest way to address that question is the theme I've been giving it is what was is going to be more. So whatever had existed is going to exist all the more. And that goes for strengths and that goes for weaknesses. So the children who are prone to anxiety, to restlessness, to low impulse control on the stressful situations they're in now, it'll be all the more so. But our children, like ourselves, have strengths as well. And their resilience and strength will also be all the more so. And we're seeing that again and again. I have to say that some of the imaginative and even amusing material that's being posted has been hugely important in terms of our adjustment and adaptation. So it's bringing out the best and the worst, and that goes for relationships too. So let's say a tense sibling relationship, and by the way, sibling rivalry is normal. All kids fight, but if it's, let's say, out of the rubric of what would be normal, if it's a bit more excessive, it'll be all the more excessive. And tensions that exist, even marital tensions that had been manageable before, are going to probably become amplified. It's often referenced that in the Wuhan province, when the quarantine was lifted, there was a record number of divorces. I hope that's not going to be the case here. We just have to recognize that everything now is amplified, and keep that in mind as we're discussing, as we're tackling the social and emotional adjustment. And again, your own equanimity, you as the parent, your adaptation adjustment is going to have a huge bearing on the adjustment of the child. So if there is, let's say, excessive tension or friction, first place you got to look inside and see what's going on with yourselves, and then you can address it for someone else. Okay, we got a bunch of questions came in while I was talking. What do you recommend for an early childhood child who is experiencing regression for his age during this time? There's a Latin expression that my mother used to use, a lazaina zoi, let it be, let them regress a little. And again, if they're regressing to the womb, I mean, obviously, but some regression is going to happen. Take it with a grain of salt. Maybe I would be more likely to tell you just regress with them, let them be at that stage a little bit more, and when this is over, we'll bear down on them. But if it's extreme, then you may have to take some, or if it's manipulative, which could happen. You can have the clever child who says, "Oh, gee, this I can hang my hat on this COVID thing, so I can't do homework. I can't stop severing my sister's arm because it's COVID-19 or something like that." Your child, it's real and what's affected. What would you say is a normal amount of screen time for a preschool age child in a day, including the Zoom school day and videos? Where should we limit it? Because I don't know if I have the exact criteria of the exact amount of time, and I'm not sure if we can say there's a universal number. First of all, your child. You'll know when they get that sort of like hypnotic look on their face as if they're someplace else. But if you have to err, we're going to be a little bit more lenient than we usually do, but maybe err in the direction of limiting it. And by the way, there's a very big difference between spending 3 hours on the internet straight, or spending 3 hours with in-between time dedicated to more creative, imaginative activities, active activities, exercise, etc. So factor that in. And by the way, another consideration, which is a serious consideration, is that we all have our jobs which are running from home and our responsibilities from home. There isn't a better babysitter in the world. And again, under these extreme circumstances, before you lose your job, let them be too long on the internet. Again, it's an emergency situation. We're taking extreme measures, and get your job done and preserve your income and your future potential income, and don't jeopardize it over a battle of using devices. For kids who are liking being homeschooled, how can we anticipate adjusting back to school? It's a great question. And it would not surprise me if we're going to see more homeschooling either more homeschooling when this is over or more individualized computer-based instruction within the school, because the computer is, I often talk about how we're in the middle of what I call the technology revolution, which is going to put the industrial revolution to shame. Technology isn't just having devices, it's changing our whole way of thinking, it's changing our whole way of operating. And it's going to change education very radically. And it would not surprise me in the least if our education becomes more tailored. And I think that might be an actual improvement, that it becomes more tailored to individual, which we can more skillfully, very hard when you're the teacher in front of 35 children to individually educate 35 kids. But when there's a computer that measures their skills, assesses their strengths and weaknesses, and can adjust the instruction to their particular needs, we can individualize instruction. And I think we're going to be seeing more of that. And that might be one of the silver linings from this crisis. And how do you address screen time for a 10 and 5-year-old minus the Zoom and school sessions? Okay, that's a great question. I think you do have to maybe make a differentiation that there's school, and that's important, by the way, in life, because there's a very big difference when you're sitting in front of your computer at work and when you're playing a game on the computer, or when you yourself are using the computer for sheer, for skill development, and when you're watching a movie. And even though it's the same device, looks the same, et cetera, it's an important differentiation. And don't forget, technology, the internet is going to be, as much as it's a part of our lives now, when our children are adults, it's going to be all the more dominant. And the ability of the child to use it skillfully is going to be a lifelong skill, given the way life is projecting, is going, the way the world is going. So sometimes when people ask me, how do you know when someone's addicted to the device or if they're just using it a lot? And the answer really is, are you in control? Are you in control of the device, or is the device in control of you? And this is, again, an opportunity, as we're so dependent on the computer and devices, how to be the masters, how to be the balabas, if you will, of your device. Take another question. Would you say there is a difference between using interactive screens, i.e. iPad and video games, versus watching TV or movie? For sure. One of the problems with a lot of the way in which the devices are used is the passivity. You don't have to use your imagination. You don't have to think. Everything is immediately provided, or you're responding in split seconds, very quickly. Now, sometimes that responding very quickly it helps develop visual motor skills, and we've seen that. But in terms of using your mind, thinking, analyzing, it's much better when the device poses you with a challenge and you have to contemplate a response and then get the feedback, than when it's just all bombarding and hitting you. Now, it doesn't mean they can't have those kind of games, and they can't watch movies, and they can't have that type of entertainment as part of their world. But it's in appropriate dosages. And again, that's sort of just chill time, which we need, we all can benefit from, but it's not constructive. And by the way, that goes for a lot of these, the video games are constructed by brilliant people to make it very difficult for you to turn it off. And by the way, distorts your sense of time. That's another very important thing, especially the more frenetically active shows throws off your sense of time. The reason for that is that most attention is an in and out experience. Most attention is your focus. Like when I'm speaking, you may not be aware of it, but you're focusing and reflecting. So it moves more slowly, even with my rapid New York rattle. But I have a son-in-law who's from out of town. It's brutal. By the time he finishes a sentence, I could do the Gettysburg Address. But anyway, but there is that in and out experience when there's so much stimulation and so much activity and so many split-second decisions. You don't have that experience. So an hour feels like 10 minutes. And when you come and say you've been on the computer for an hour, your kids, no, it can't be, and they're having their usual tantrum because it doesn't feel that way. And therefore we have to be, and again, that's part of getting that mastery. Okay, is it okay to take kids to go food shopping for a change of scenery? If yes, at what age is appropriate? So number one, don't take health risks. Please, health comes first. So if you don't need to be in a setting, or if your child doesn't need to be in a setting where there is a lot of people around and the possibility for infection, there are many ways they can have change of scenery. They can have change of scenery on the devices. You can go on the computer and tour any country in the world. So they can have that. But yes, it's good for them to get out and get visual stimulation. I'll share with you something actually very interesting. Maybe that will conclude. In the first week of quarantine, I had extremely vivid dreams. I still do, but not as much. And I said to my wife, I said, I think just not having that visual stimulation, my brain is trying to compensate. And sure enough, I read an article about a week or two later that many people are reporting that, and that's what they think, that the brain is compensating for the lack of stimulation. So, but I'm not sure if food shopping is the best way. Maybe walks, going to a sparsely populated park, bike riding with distancing. These types of activities are ways to get stimulation, and not, food shopping, we have to do it. And sometimes, so we have to go to the stores, but again, especially kids who may run around and not be so careful, it may not be the best place to go. But again, I'm not a physician and I'm not into public health, but check from responsible sites and sources, and please stay safe. It's not a joke. I'm dealing with a lot of people who have either survived the COVID-19 or lost loved ones to it. And even those who survived are highly traumatized and highly affected. So we shouldn't get sloppy. And hopefully we'll soon have a handle on all this. Okay, I think I overextended my stay. Thank you for listening. Again, the information's available. It will be on the Ohel website and on the YouTube in a day or two. And when we are, I'm sure I speak for Dr. Feinberg and for Michelle, but certainly we're available at Ohel as well if people feel that our services can be useful.
Let me just jump in, and on behalf of all of the 90 plus families that tuned in, I want to thank Dr. Blumenthal for his time, for his candidness, for his outstanding presentation. He's very real and he's very approachable, and I think if anyone does need his services, we would certainly recommend. And of course, just a plug for our own psychology team, Dr. Feinberg and team have been working in classes with groups, reaching out to students and families, and they continue to be an outstanding resource for our school. So thank you, Dr. Blumenthal, and continued hatzlacha in your important work. Thank you all for coming, and stay safe and healthy. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, everybody.